round 4. Burn those 2 words into your memory tonight, because in about 6 weeks, those 2 words are going to be the most catastrophic, career-shrinking, dignity-vaporizing syllables Drake has ever had permanently welded to his forehead in the modern history of this genre, and I am putting my full name, my full channel, and my full analytical reputation on that verdict on the record, on camera, on this Kendrick Lamar review before a single official track title has landed anywhere on the internet. Every reaction channel on this platform is out there right this second running one identical, copy-paste theory. They're all reading the exact same wrong page. Every last one of them is about to be publicly incinerated the instant the tracklist sequencing crosses the timeline, because the version of this album everybody is screaming, the 12 rounds means 12 Drake shots story. The one that has been stamped on thumbnails from Compton to Toronto to every laptop between the two, is not slightly wrong. It is inverted. It is backwards. It is the single laziest read of a Kendrick Lamar rollout I have witnessed in 15 years covering this culture, and it is going to collapse in front of millions of people at the identical moment. Tap the like right now. Lock the subscribe. Hype this thing up. Because I promise you have not heard this Kendrick Lamar album framed the way I am about to frame it, and you are not going to hear it framed this way anywhere else on YouTube. Do it now, before we open the card, because when the sequencing starts leaking in fragments, the order of the rounds is going to become the entire story, and the people who logged this timestamp are going to be the ones who look like they saw the whole map coming. Everybody else spends a weekend quietly deleting old uploads. That is not a threat. That is a schedule. So here is the claim, stated plainly, no hedging, no soft edges, no diplomatic wrapper. Kendrick Lamar is not making a diss album. Kendrick Lamar is making a title defense. 12 rounds. 12 individually named opponents. 12 different weight classes of enemy inside the machinery of modern hip-hop. And Drake occupies exactly 1 seat on that card. 1. Drake is a name punched in and punched out early so the crowd can settle into their seats before the real fights begin. And the second I lay the rest of that card down in front of you, you are going to understand why this record was never a beef project in the first place. It is a full-scale industry restructuring wearing gloves and a mouthpiece, and the fact that nobody in the commentary economy has said it out loud yet is genuinely one of the great analytical failures of this era. Start with the language PG Lang has been quietly whispering since Grammy weekend, because none of it is decoration. Not one image. Not one caption. The taped hand, the knuckle photograph Dave Free posted in that specific silent way Dave Free posts everything he wants the culture to unlock 18 months from now. The Pernell Whitaker tribute the whole internet scrolled past with a laughing emoji and never actually decoded. These are not mood boards. These are not aesthetic flexes. Every last one of them is pointing at a named human being who fought in a specific ring in a specific decade with a specific stylistic signature, and that is the detail that changes the entire read. Because each round of this Kendrick Lamar record is built in the shape of a particular fighter, and each of those fighters maps cleanly onto a particular target inside modern rap. This is not metaphor. This is blueprint. This is architecture. The taped hand is round 1. The knuckle photograph is round 2. The Whitaker post is round 3. Line them up in the order they dropped, and the card assembles itself in the palm of your hand. It has been hanging in plain sight for months, while everybody stood in the middle of the room shouting one name at the sky. And understand something specifically about that Whitaker tribute, because Whitaker is the tell that proves the entire coding system. You do not invoke Pernell Whitaker if you are engineering a knockout round. Whitaker was a defensive surgeon. One of the slickest technicians who ever laced up a pair of gloves. A man who won by making his opponent miss until the opponent embarrassed himself in front of a stadium. Choosing Whitaker as a signal means round 3 is a technique round, not a demolition round. That is how precise this coding is. That is how much homework has gone into a Kendrick Lamar rollout most people are still calling vibes. Round 1 is not aimed at any rapper at all. Round 1 is aimed at the format itself. This is Kendrick Lamar walking under the lights to establish that the streaming era version of hip-hop has gone soft, hollow, algorithmically sanded into background furniture, and that somebody needs to remind the room what the craft was actually supposed to sound like. The opponent is the recommendation engine. The style is jab work. Nobody hits the canvas in round one, but every fighter watching from the seats learns exactly what kind of evening this is going to be, and every executive in the front row learns exactly what kind of Kendrick Lamar has shown up. Round 2 is where the first group walks in, and it is a group, not a person, because Kendrick Lamar in Fight Camp does not swing at individuals when he can dismantle a whole school of thought in 3 minutes. Round 2 is aimed at the entire cohort that turned the vocal booth into a mood-setting device and quietly dragged the technical floor of this genre through the basement. This is not one artist. This is a movement. The style is inside work. Body shots. Wear the ribs down before you ever go upstairs. Entire subgenres are going to feel personally named without a single name being spoken, and that silence is the weapon. Round 3 is the corporate ambush, and this is where it stops being fun for a lot of very expensive people. The opponent in round 3 is the label apparatus itself. Not an executive. Not a rival. The organism. The publicly traded machine that has been feeding on Kendrick Lamar and everybody standing beside him for the entirety of his career. The style is rope-a-dope. Absorb the contracts. Absorb the accountants. Absorb the quiet interference, and then unload every last piece of it in one continuous stretch. Think about the timing here. 2 full years of Kendrick Lamar cataloging every moment the machine tried to inflate a rival's numbers, tried to steer a narrative about who was actually winning, tried to run interference on a catalog it does not deserve. Round 3 is where those receipts get read aloud in bars, and there is no legal department on this planet that can file a motion against a verse. Round 4. Drake. Yes, this is the round the entire world has decided the whole album is. It is not. It is one round. It is the round with the loudest gate and the biggest walkout and the most cameras in the arena, and it is still one round. The style is short, compact, in and out of the pocket before Drake's brain registers that a punch was thrown. And it lasts exactly as long as it needs to last, because Kendrick Lamar already handed Drake a full calendar year back in 2024, and the scorecards were read out in public in front of everybody. Round 4 is Kendrick Lamar tapping a former challenger once, politely, to confirm the numbers have not moved, and then walking to the neutral corner to prepare for round 5, which is where the floor of this record genuinely opens up. Do not skip past the structural violence of that placement, because the placement itself is the punch. In a 12-round card, the 4th fight is not the main event, and it is not the co-main. It is a mid-card slot. A warm-up. A name promoters use to fill seats before the people who matter come out. That is the chair Drake has been assigned. The biggest commercial rap artist of an entire generation, a man who has anchored more headlines than most labels have artists, deliberately, publicly, surgically placed at 4. The seating chart is the insult, and the seating chart becomes public property the instant the sequencing surfaces, which means the most devastating shot on this Kendrick Lamar record lands before anybody hears one syllable of it. Round 5 is the round that breaks the internet, and I mean that in the most literal servers buckling sense the phrase has ever carried. Round 5 is not aimed at a rival. Round 5 is aimed at a peer. Somebody Kendrick Lamar has publicly respected. Somebody the culture has quietly filed under permanently off limits. Somebody whose name has never once appeared near a diss verse from Kendrick Lamar because everybody assumed the truce was structural. And the boxing frame is precision engineered to explain exactly why round 5 happens anyway, because inside a ring you can respect a man completely and still walk out there to take something from him. Respect and competition were never opposites. They are roommates. Round 5 is going to reorganize the entire culture's understanding of what Kendrick Lamar actually is, and it is going to prove that a competitive appetite this large does not recognize old friendships when a belt is involved. Run the list in your head right now. Think about who Kendrick Lamar has stood beside on a stage, praised in an interview, thanked in liner notes, and then privately measured himself against in the dark of a studio. There are maybe 3 names that fit that chair. Maybe 4. And whichever one of those names is sitting there when the tracklist drops, an entire industry of music journalists is going to be typing emergency essays at 3 in the morning trying to explain how a friendship became a fight in front of the whole world. That is the function of round 5. It converts an alliance into a contest, and it forces the culture to finally admit that greatness and warmth can occupy the same body. There has never been a moment on a Kendrick Lamar record carrying that specific species of weight. Round 6 is the corner, not an attack, a demonstration. Kendrick Lamar brings in a feature, and I have suspicions about who, and the purpose is to show the room that the authenticity was never a one-man performance. The ecosystem is real. The sound being defended was built by more than one pair of hands. It is a breather disguised as a cosign, and it is going to land like a benediction. This is the point where the combat record briefly becomes a family photograph. PG Lang's scaffolding made audible. The architects who quietly built this entire late-decade sound in rooms nobody has photographed finally get their names in the credits of the fight itself. Round 7 is the media round, and half the people who will react to this album are the target of it. This is the round aimed at journalists, at podcasters, at the reaction economy in aggregate, at the entire professional class that has spent 2 years explaining a man they have never once accurately read. It names nobody because it does not need to. It is aimed at a category. Every wrong hot take. Every ranking that placed Kendrick Lamar incorrectly. Every episode that predicted the wrong winner. Every thumbnail that ran the wrong theory. All of it gets filed into a single continuous public receipt. Kendrick Lamar has been reading the coverage. Kendrick Lamar remembers the coverage. Round 7 is the memory being emptied onto the floor. Round 8 is the mirror. Every 12-round title defense has a middle stretch where the champion resets, breathes, and remembers why he is standing in a ring in the first place. Round 8 is not a punch. It is an interrogation. And the man on both sides of it is Kendrick Lamar. It is going to retroactively rewrite every round that came before it, because it finally states what all the violence was in service of. This is where the record stops being sport and becomes cinema. Where the introspective instinct that has been building since 2022 clicks into a combat structure. Where the philosopher and the fighter stop arguing and start co-signing each other. Round 8 is the one critics are still going to be writing about in 2040. Round 9 is geography. Round 9 is Compton. The specific block. The specific ledger. The explicit statement that every single thing Kendrick Lamar has built since 2011 is downstream of one set of coordinates. And it is aimed at every artist who has ever rented street authenticity by the month without paying anything into the account. Compton is not a costume you can put on for a rollout. Round 9 draws that line in permanent ink and tells the rest of the industry to stop borrowing an aesthetic they never earned. Round 10 is generational, and this is where Kendrick Lamar's posture changes forever. This is the round where Kendrick Lamar stops comparing himself to Nas, stops comparing himself to Jay-Z, stops gesturing at Tupac, and simply stands level with them. Same shelf. Same weight class. No permission requested. Every previous Kendrick Lamar record has danced up to that claim and then walked it back with a self-deprecating counterline in the very next bar. Round 10 is where the implication becomes an announcement, and the announcement does not come with a retraction stapled to the back. Historians are going to quote Round 10 for 50 years. Round 11 is inheritance. Round 11 is about the after. What happens when Kendrick Lamar is gone? Where the sound travels next? Whose hands the microphone lands in? This is coronation-adjacent territory, and it is engineered to hand a torch forward on Kendrick Lamar's terms, in Kendrick Lamar's language, on Kendrick Lamar's clock. Kendrick quietly deciding who is authorized to carry this thing and who is very explicitly not. And if there is a name inside that verse the culture is not braced for, that artist's whole career trajectory gets rewritten overnight while they are asleep. Round 12 is the knockout, and here is where every casual listener is about to be catastrophically wrong. The final punch is not aimed at Drake. It is not aimed at the label. Not the cohort. Not the media class. Round 12 is aimed at the previous version of Kendrick Lamar. The version that existed before this record. The one that was still climbing. Round 12 is a funeral for that man and a birth certificate for whatever version replaces him. Read that again slowly, because it is the load-bearing sentence of this entire breakdown. The knockout does not land on any of the 11 previous opponents. The knockout lands on Kendrick Lamar himself. Kendrick Lamar is closing his own chapter before he opens the next one. And that is not defeat. That is a man voluntarily vacating a belt so he can be weighed against a heavier one. Now follow the logic of why this structure is specifically, surgically catastrophic for Drake, because this is the section that should genuinely alarm Drake's camp. If this were a straight diss album, Drake would have a lane. He would answer bar for bar, round for round. The culture would consume a standard cycle and Drake would at least occupy the frame as a full-sized opponent. That is the scenario being wargamed behind closed doors right this second. Drake's camp is drafting rebuttals to a document that does not exist and workshopping cover art for a response that will not fit the shape of the thing it is responding to, because Drake is one of 12. Drake is not the main event. And the moment Drake is answering a single round inside a much larger cultural object, Drake's response becomes structurally undersized by pure geometry. You cannot rebut an album that is not about you. You can only rebut your own round. And a rebuttal to round 4 inside a 12-round Kendrick Lamar title defense makes Drake look precisely like what the card is quietly framing him as. An undercard fighter demanding coverage the main event has already walked past. That is the trap. And it is a beautiful one. Drake is not being erased. Drake is being reduced. Demoted from primary rival to one-line item on a fight card. And reduction is a crueler weapon than erasure, because erasure at least preserves the memory of a full-sized enemy. Reduction shrinks Drake in public, in real time, on a stage of Kendrick Lamar's choosing, in front of an audience that clocks the new proportions immediately. And once those proportions are public, they cannot be undone. There is no counter record that resizes Drake back to headline scale, because the scale was redrawn by somebody else's sequencing, and the sequencing is already printed. Consider what happens the moment that tracklist officially crosses the timeline. Every YouTube channel that spent 2 months screaming that this Kendrick Lamar album is a 12-shot demolition of one man has to walk it back on camera. Every podcast that ran that thumbnail is caught holding the wrong theory in public. And the culture is going to reward the analysts who read the card correctly and quietly punish everybody who ran the easy version. That is a reaction economy realignment nested inside an industry realignment. This record breaks 2 ecosystems at the same time, and it has not been released yet. Look at the calendar too, because the calendar is screaming at us. The taped hand, the knuckle photograph, the Whitaker tribute, the long engineered silences between each drop, that is not a content schedule. That is a fight week promotional cycle. And if you follow the sport at all, you know exactly what one looks like from the inside. The last stretch of weeks has been fight week, which means the bell is close, which means, if the signals are honest, we are standing in the final quiet before the walkout. The second that bell rings, every round I just walked you through gets a real name locked beside it, and the whole culture spends the entire summer arguing about which one hit hardest. And here is a detail nobody in the commentary space has clocked yet. The last fighters to run a promotional cycle this deliberate were Ollie in his prime, Sugar Ray Leonard in his mid-welterweight run, and Mayweather in the final third of his career. Every one of them weaponized the promotion itself. The press conference was round 1. The weigh-in was round 2. The walkout was round 3. By the time anybody threw a real punch, the opponent had already lost 3 rounds on the psychological scorecard. That is exactly what has been happening with Kendrick Lamar for months. Kendrick Lamar has been winning rounds against the entire industry without releasing a single verse, and the industry has not noticed because the industry does not think in fight camp terms. The industry thinks in release dates. Now the features. Because the features are their own subplot, and if the round 6 theory holds, I am locking a prediction in right here on the record. Baby Keem lands on this Kendrick Lamar record, and not in round 4, and not anywhere near the Drake round, but inside one of the demonstration rounds where the PG Lang sound gets co-signed rather than weaponized. Schoolboy Q has to be present somewhere on this thing. Doja Cat has a real shot at a slot that expands her lane going into her own cycle. And if there is a Tyler the Creator collaboration buried anywhere on this project, and the signals lean open rather than closed, the culture loses its collective mind. Because Kendrick Lamar and Tyler the Creator have orbited each other for a full decade without ever landing in the same booth. Keep SZA on the mental map even if her name never touches the final credits, because her adjacency to this Kendrick Lamar universe sonically is now permanent. And if a chorus surfaces carrying a familiar tonal fingerprint, the overlap between two album cycles becomes yet another layer of strategy inside the same orbit. But the features are not the actual story. The rounds are the story. And the story of the rounds is that Kendrick Lamar is not returning to this genre to fight one man. Kendrick Lamar is returning to hold court over an entire generation of rivals, allies, ancestors, and heirs inside one 12-round document that gets argued over for the next decade. Think about how rare that structural achievement actually is. Think about how few records in the recorded history of this music have arrived carrying a structural concept that doubles as a career verdict on the spot. Illmatic pulled it off. Ready to Die pulled it off. Reasonable Doubt pulled it off. Good Kid, Mad City pulled it off. To Pimp a Butterfly pulled it off. And almost none of those albums had 12 individually named opponents engineered into the architecture from day one. This Kendrick Lamar record is arriving with the weight pre-installed. Kendrick Lamar is not waiting on anybody to hand him a frame. Kendrick Lamar is walking out with the frame already welded shut. That is exactly why this cycle has felt fundamentally unlike anything before it, because it is unlike anything before it. GNX was a gift dropped on a Friday morning with zero warning and zero scaffolding. A victory lap handed to the fans for free. This Kendrick Lamar record is the exact inverse. Kendrick Lamar has been announcing this album in visual code for months. Every post is a chapter marker. Every silence is a rest in the bar. When the sequencing finally lands, it is not going to feel like a surprise. It is going to feel like the solution to a puzzle the culture has been staring at since Grammy night without realizing it was a puzzle at all. And that is the exact reason Drake cannot climb out from under this one. Drake's operating model, top to bottom, is volume and velocity. Flood the timeline. Drop 3 projects inside one window. Bury the room in raw material. And hope the sheer quantity somehow constitutes an argument. Kendrick Lamar's strategy on the other side of the ring is the precise opposite. One record. 12 individually engineered rounds. Let the architecture do the talking. Volume against architecture. Speed against precision. And in a straight head-to-head on those terms, architecture wins every single time. Because architecture outlives the news cycle and volume evaporates with it. Now let me push the frame one turn further, because most of the commentary space is still not sitting with the full implication. Every Kendrick Lamar cycle since 2011 has ended with the same aftermarket confession. The critics, the podcasters, the reaction channels, the labels, all of them arrive at the same recognition 18 months later, once the culture has caught up. This time Kendrick Lamar has removed the 18-month delay. The map is being handed to us on release day. The frame is being handed to us on release day. The verdict is being handed to us on release day. And the only participants left with any dignity at the end of this cycle are the ones who read the map correctly the first time they saw it. That is why I put my full name on this Kendrick Lamar read before a single track has surfaced. Because when the sequencing lands and the 12 targets are lined up on the wall in order, the accounts that ran the 12 shots at Drake theory are going to be scrubbing their thumbnails in silence. The accounts that ran the map correctly are going to be the ones the culture actually returns to for the next Kendrick Lamar cycle. And there is a reason those cycles matter, because inside modern rap, the analyst who reads Kendrick Lamar correctly is the analyst who reads the entire genre correctly. Kendrick Lamar is not just the biggest artist. Kendrick Lamar is the diagnostic. Kendrick Lamar is the instrument. Kendrick Lamar is the barometer against which every other artist in this era gets measured, and that has been true since well before the Drake cycle, and it is going to be true well after it. Consider what that means for the Iceman roster still trying to run interference on this Kendrick Lamar release. Every day they attach Drake's name to a Kendrick Lamar headline. They hand Kendrick Lamar another point of visibility. Every hot take from a DJ academic stream, and I have watched more of those streams than any sane adult should ever have to, is another spike in Kendrick Lamar's algorithmic footprint. The drive-through oracle of the reaction economy has become one of Kendrick Lamar's most valuable unpaid promoters, and he does not even notice. Every rant, every diss album, fantasy, Every projection of the Iceman narrative onto a Kendrick Lamar rollout that never asked for it, all of it is fuel. Kendrick Lamar has effectively outsourced his own marketing to a fandom that thinks it is attacking him. It is the cleanest jiu-jitsu maneuver in the modern culture wars. And this is where the Kendrick denial complex becomes clinical, because there is genuinely no other word for it. An entire commentary class is now dedicating full episodes of programming to explaining why the greatest technical rapper of his generation is somehow the fraud, while the numerically bigger commercial artist orbiting him is somehow the truth teller. That is not a critical position. That is a support group meeting. The Barbs at their absolute peak of denial look like tenured Yale faculty next to what the Iceman roster has become in 2026. And every single episode of that programming, every single monologue, every single podcast segment is another lit match Kendrick Lamar never asked for and never has to strike himself. Round 12 is going to close all of this. Not by insulting them, by making them irrelevant. That is the killshot embedded inside the closing round. Kendrick Lamar does not need to name the reaction economy. Kendrick Lamar just needs to release the album in the correct sequence, with the correct 12 targets, and every account that misread the card gets sorted automatically. The algorithm handles the punishment. Kendrick Lamar does not have to lift a finger. That is why round 12 is a funeral for the old Kendrick Lamar and a birth certificate for the next one, because the old Kendrick Lamar still cared about being heard correctly. The next one has built a machine that hears itself. Now let me answer the question I already see typing itself in the comments. Yes, Drake is going to respond. Drake responds to everything. It is the reflex that defines him. Drake will drop a track, then a mixtape, then a surprise EP, then a documentary, then a TikTok cycle, then another album, and every single unit of that output will be measured against a Kendrick Lamar record it does not touch structurally. Drake will spend the next 2 years responding to round 4. Kendrick Lamar will spend the next 2 years on rounds 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That math is the trap. Drake picked the round. Kendrick Lamar picked the 11 other rounds Drake will never get to fight in. And the audience already understands that math intuitively, even if they cannot articulate it yet, because the audience has watched this specific dynamic play out for 2 full years and can feel exactly where the ceiling is. That ceiling. Let us name it clearly. The permanent bronze of this generation. That is the position Drake has been assigned by the shape of this rollout, and it is a position he cannot escape by outputting more product, because the position is not about product. The position is about frame. Kendrick Lamar has framed Drake as a fighter 1 weight class below the main event, and no amount of commercial success closes that gap. You can be the runner-up who won every headline and none of the belts. That is the sentence being written into round 4 in permanent ink, and it is the sentence Drake's team is going to spend the next decade trying to unwrite and never succeeding, because you cannot unwrite a frame. You can only change the frame, and Drake does not control the pen. The bill comes due. That is the phrase to keep in your head all summer. The bill comes due for the reaction economy that ran the wrong theory. The bill comes due for the podcast circuit that placed Drake at the top of the wrong ladder. The bill comes due for the industry apparatus that inflated numbers it never earned. The bill comes due for every commentator who traded accuracy for algorithm bait. And the bill arrives folded inside a 12-track Kendrick Lamar record none of them saw coming in the correct shape. That is the elegance of this rollout. It settles every open account in the same 40 minutes. I want you to understand the sheer improbability of what Kendrick Lamar is about to do here. There have been maybe 8 moments in the entire recorded history of hip-hop where an artist has been able to shift the entire structural conversation of the genre with a single project. Illmatic did it. Ready to Die did it. All Eyes on Me did it. The Blueprint did it. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy did it. To Pimp a Butterfly did it. Damn did it. GKMC did it. And Kendrick Lamar is about to become the first artist in this genre's recorded history to do it back to back to back inside the same decade with 3 different projects, on 3 different structural frameworks, aimed at 3 different sets of targets, each one arriving with more scaffolding than the last. That is not a career arc. That is a monument being built in real time while everybody else argues about foot traffic. And the closer this Kendrick Lamar record gets to release, the more the coverage is going to fracture. Watch for it. Half the commentary space will pivot toward the round-by-round read once the sequencing surfaces. The other half will double down on the diss-album framing because they have already invested their credibility in it, and they will spend the next 6 months getting publicly outperformed by the accounts that pivoted correctly. That fracture is where the reaction economy realigns for the next cycle, and the ledger of who read this correctly is going to matter for the next decade of Kendrick Lamar analysis. Because Kendrick Lamar's next 3 cycles are going to reward the analysts who called this one right. And this Kendrick Lamar rollout is the biggest trust event this genre has generated in 15 years. And let me sit with something else that nobody in the reaction lane is saying out loud, because it matters for how this Kendrick Lamar rollout is going to read 6 months from now. Every great title defense in the history of combat sports has one shared property that separates it from a routine championship bout, and it is not the roster of opponents on the undercard. It is the champion's willingness to change while he is still winning. That is the rarest instinct in the sport, and it is the rarest instinct in this genre. Almost every legendary rapper in the history of this music has stayed exactly the same as long as the checks kept clearing. Kendrick Lamar is doing the opposite. Kendrick Lamar is voluntarily dismantling the version of Kendrick Lamar that just won the biggest cultural bout of the decade, and Kendrick Lamar is doing it in public, in structural code, in the sequencing itself. That is not a career move. That is an act of artistic violence directed inward, and it is the reason round 12 is the only knockout on the card that actually matters. The other 11 knockouts are collateral. The final one is the point. Now think about what that reframing does to every commentator still trying to force this record into a diss album template. It does not just make them wrong on the small question. It makes them wrong on the entire shape of the artist. Because if you are still reading Kendrick Lamar as a rapper whose defining creative instinct is targeting Drake, you have missed every single lesson the last 3 Kendrick Lamar cycles have tried to teach you. Kendrick Lamar targets Drake the way a surgeon targets a splinter. It is a 2-minute inconvenience inside a 9-hour operation aimed at reorganizing the entire organism. Drake is not the disease. Drake is the fingernail Kendrick Lamar is cleaning under so he can get to the actual procedure, which is the wholesale restructuring of what a rap album is allowed to attempt in 2026. And once you understand that, you understand why the 12 shots at Drake theory is not just wrong. It is embarrassing. It is the analytical equivalent of watching a chess grandmaster set up a 14-move endgame and calling it checkers because you saw a pawn move first. Now let me hand you the framework you are going to hear every serious critic quoting inside 6 weeks, because I want it stamped here first. The 3 axes of this Kendrick Lamar record are technique, history, and inheritance. Technique lives in rounds 1 through 5. History lives in rounds 6 through 10. Inheritance lives in rounds 11 and 12. Every single opponent on the card fits inside one of those 3 axes, and once you overlay that grid on top of the sequencing, the entire map clicks into place with an audible sound. Drake, positioned at 4, sits at the very tail end of the technique axis, which is exactly where a former rival gets converted into a technical exercise rather than a personal one. That placement is not accidental. That placement is the entire thesis of the album compressed into one seat assignment, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And you cannot go back to the flat diss album read without publicly embarrassing yourself in front of an audience that has now seen the grid. 12 rounds. 12 opponents. 1 belt. Drake is round 4. Round 4 is not the ending. The knockout arrives in round 12, and round 12 is not about Drake at all. It is about the death of one era of Kendrick Lamar and the birth of the next. Which means Drake, the man everybody has decided this album is about, does not even appear in the final act of the film he thinks he is starring in. That is not disrespect. That is worse. That is disinterest. And disinterest from Kendrick Lamar at this altitude of the career is a colder verdict than any diss track has ever delivered. Log the timestamp on this Kendrick Lamar breakdown, because when that sequencing surfaces and every round has a real name locked beside it, you are going to remember that the boxing record was never a beef record. It was a coronation with a fight card stapled to the front. And the coronation only makes sense once all 12 rounds are hanging on the wall in order. Type the name in the comments below of who you think round 5 is aimed at, because round 5 is the round that permanently changes how this culture reads Kendrick Lamar, and I want to see which name gets typed the most before the sequencing confirms it. Tell me if you think I have the order wrong too. Tell me which round you think Drake actually belongs in, because I have seen honest arguments for 2, and I have seen honest arguments for 11, and both of them are more interesting than the theory everybody else is running. Tap the like on the way out. Hit the subscribe if you are new. Hype it up while you are at it, because the second that sequencing leaks, I am going to be the first analyst on this platform with the full round-by-round mapped to real names in real time, and you are going to want to be logged in when it happens. And if you want the deeper background on how this rollout has been engineered in total silence for months, roll straight into the breakdown sitting in the sidebar right now. Because that is where the visual signals get decoded one at a time, and the card starts making sense from the inside out. Kendrick Lamar is not coming to fight one man. Kendrick Lamar is coming to fight everybody standing in the building. Drake is round 4. That is the map. That is the record. And the bell is about to ring.